Good evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I am Doge. Actually, I'm Bill Lundun, also known as Joe Biden's favorite honorary illegal alien. So, tonight's news brought to you by none other than Dr. Michael Bratland of Chris Dental, where if you call him today, he'll see you today. He's one of the few actually the only dentist I've ever had where I have his cell phone number, and he gives it to all of his patients. Go see Dr. Michael Bratland, particularly if you're looking for a crown. They did super work on mine. All right, so we're going to kind of keep this short, mainly because there's not a whole lot going on. So we'll start with this, and that is Democrats in the Oregon legislature are celebrating because their gerrymandering worked. They, of course, gerrymandered Oregon's voting districts in 2000 or in the aftermath of the 2020 census. And they're very happy because what it did allow them to do was flip a seat in Bend, Oregon, which is in Central Oregon, that essentially had been Republican for decades. Now, the flip allowed them to turn the seat, formerly held by Senator Tim Knopp, and it gave them a supermajority in the Senate. They were unable, however, to take a supermajority in the House. Now, that's important because with a supermajority in the House and a supermajority in the Senate, the way that it works is they can raise any taxes that they want to and create any new taxes they want to. And to do that, right now, they still need at least one Republican vote in the House. Voters, by the way, in the Bend district had reliably supported Republicans for years before the map was redrawn by Democrats in the legislature in the wake of the 2020 census. And at the time, the Democrats said, and now they have said it publicly, that now that will likely be a reliably blue district going forward. At least they're not hiding it. They're honest about it. But that doesn't mean that the Republicans in Oregon don't have their problems. You have House Republican Minority Leader Jeff Helfrich, and he stepped down as the House Minority Leader. And he cited frustration with the ongoing drama in his own party as the key leader to stepping down from the caucus. Now, that's according to an internal letter that he sent to caucus members on Monday. Now, he'd served as the caucus leader since September of 2023. Now, in a press conference or press release on Monday night, what he stated was that the recent death of his dad had prompted him to reevaluate his priorities and make the decision to resign. Well, that's what he told the public. But the release of this new letter shows he had more frustrations. He wrote, and I'll quote him, "I thought of our caucus as a team, and I was its captain. Instead, I found myself playing a solo in the band and my own teammates heckling me all along the way." Helfrich said he didn't expect internal drama like he received when he stepped into the role. He said, "As recently as today, while in Colorado, burying my father, I had to deal with caucus politics of someone trying to oust me." He further wrote, "Frankly, I'm tired of it." Who wouldn't be? It's unclear who challenged Helfrich on the leadership role. I'll give you my ideas on a second. House Republicans are going to elect a new caucus leader next Monday. Helfrich also wrote in the letter, "I went into the job expecting tough fights with Democratic leadership. Instead, the toughest fights were within the caucus and the party." And he concluded, "If you have a problem with the next leader, put on your big kid pants and have an adult conversation and share your concerns." Now, my thought is that it is former House Minority Leader Christine Drazan. Now, Drazan ran for governor. She was out of politics for a while. Of course, the districts were redrawn, as I mentioned, by Democrats. And then she ran against a sitting Republican to take his seat to get back into the legislature, which incidentally she won. My thoughts? Christine Drazan is probably the one that's trying to oust him. she wants her old position back. And it would make sense in some ways because there is no love lost between Christine Drazan and Governor Tina Kotek. Governor Tina Kotek at the time was, of course, the Speaker of the House, and she and Drazan never got along. And Drazan, of course, losing to her as well in the gubernatorial race, there's animosity there. So expect fireworks. This is interesting. Now, in the election, on the statewide ballot, there were a number of measures. One of them that failed was ranked choice voting. But they still have ranked choice voting in Portland. As a matter of fact, this last election was their first go-around with it. So, ranked choice voting, as you know, is being sold as the end-all, be-all of all voting methods. And it is supposed to, and I have this in all caps, guarantee high voter turnout, higher engagements by voters. Well, it got its first go-around in Portland in the general election, and it was an epic failure. Now, according to the numbers, a substantial share of Portlanders who voted in last week's election left their preference for mayor or city council, in many cases entirely blank, despite having the ability to rank up to 6 candidates from sprawling fields in each of the races. Champions of this new voter-endorsed ranked choice method for local Portland elections touted the system's promise to boost civic engagement and drive up the number of people who will cast ballots. Well, it most assuredly and quantifiably did not. The actual opposite occurred. From 17, now this depends on the areas in Portland, from 17 to 29% of residents who voted in each of the city's 4 new council districts, at an average of about 20% citywide, didn't rank a single candidate to represent them. Now, that's far more than the share of people who actually sat out city council races in the previous 2 election cycles. And I'll give you an example. In East Portland, which happens to be the city's and most poor and racially diverse quadrant, a combination of low turnout and low rates of ranking, even a single city council candidate by voters who did cast ballots meant that only 39% of registered voters had any say in which 3 candidates would represent their district, while the 12 candidates who captured or are poised to win city council seats were elected by a smaller portion of voters than past Portland council races. It actually crushed voting in Portland. This was one of the main complaints of voters in Alaska. Now, they do ranked choice voting, and the last numbers I checked, ranked choice voting is going to die in the state of Alaska. They had ballot measure number 2, which would undo ranked choice voting in the state. And this whole idea of what we described here of people not voting on the ranked choice, or maybe they would vote for one and not others, and the confusion was one of the reasons they wanted to get rid of it. The other, it actually brought voting numbers down. They were able to quantify it. So that's why Alaska, and it does look like, according to the last numbers that I saw, are going to do away with ranked choice voting for exactly the reasons that we saw in Portland. Now, Oregon, of course, is well known for just, they called it decriminalizing street drugs in Oregon. It was all but legalizing it. There was no enforcement of anything. There were actual open-air drug markets in the streets of Portland, and police couldn't do anything about it. You can say whatever you want to about, well, Oregon decriminalized it. We legalized it. We totally legalized it. Well, one of the other things that Oregon legalized was the use of psilocybin in therapeutic settings. In other words, it's used hypothetically to treat a variety of different medical or make that mental problems that people may have. And it's been going on now for about the last 6 months. So staff at psilocybin centers in Oregon have called 911 or taken a client to a hospital 5 times during the approximate time since the state's first licensed center began giving people magic mushrooms, according to new records. One person pulled a fire alarm. Another person was convinced that the people trying to guide her through her psychedelic trip were up to something and literally ran out into busy traffic as the staff followed her out and were trying to convince her to return to the center. Now, the thing is, they can't force anybody, these guides, can't force anybody to do anything. They can't even make them stay there when they're on one of these trips and literally let this person who was, as the kids may say, tripping balls, go running away through the middle of the street. Now, Oregon is the first state to legalize psilocybin, another ridiculous Oregon idea that's administered in what are called controlled settings by people trained to guide people through inward-looking trips under the influence of psychedelics that are found in mushrooms. The program is overseen by the Oregon Health, and I'm making air quotes here, you just can't see them, the Oregon Health Authority. And they write that the regulations, and they do write the regulations and the licenses for people where they can take the mushrooms. They're known as service centers. They license the people who administer them, the facilitators. And what we're finding out is it ain't going well. In addition to the 5 times that 911 was called because psilocybin clients were freaking out, people have also filed 52 separate complaints against the service centers, facilitators, and training programs. And of those, 9 are currently under active investigation. And 2 of the 911 calls came from an inner guidance. It's called Inner Guidance. It was a facility. It was located in Albany, Oregon. It's since gone out of business. And because this is Oregon, here's where this is going. At first, marijuana was legalized in the state because it was for medical purposes. And then after it had been, of course, legalized for medical purposes, then a couple of years later, they came along and said, you know what? We can just legalize this for recreational use. It'll be okay. And they told us, of course, there won't be any illegal market for marijuana anymore. It'll do away with the black market, which it decidedly did not do. As a matter of fact, Oregon became one of the largest black market suppliers of marijuana in the nation, with cartels coming into Oregon and starting illegal grow operations all over the state. So the reason that psilocybin was legalized in Oregon, and again, it was people from outside of the state that came here and said, you need to pass this bill. It'll be a good thing, is because, of course, further down the line, they want to legalize, as I said earlier, tripping balls. All right, that's a look at some of Oregon's dumb news. Rick, I now turn it over to you, and thank you, Dr. Michael Bratlin from Chris Dental, for bringing you tonight's news. Take it away, Rick.